Hello, everyone. Great to see lots of people who registered again, so returning to us for these webinars, and also many new registrants as well. So great to see that our topics are of interest. So as always, I'm Asma Bashir, co-founder at Centuro Global. And perhaps maybe I should say I'm jack of many trades and master of global immigration. So today our topic is going to be around immigration in Europe. With so many changes over the years from Brexit to a transformed Europe in some ways, I thought it would be a good debate to address some of the challenges around business travellers and different work permits and EU directives to really kind of understand where we are today. I'm also joined today by somebody I have known for many, many years, my co-speaker, Friederike Ruch from CONVINUS. She's a specialist in this subject, based out of Switzerland, and hopefully she will introduce herself very shortly. So I'll be putting some questions to Friederike around the Schengen region and the 90-day rules. We'll also talk about a little bit about posted workers, A1 certificates, inspections, and also the directive on single work permit for the EU. So there's a lot to pack into today's session, and we do have a limited amount of time to cover. So as always, I would suggest that if there are specific questions people have, please put them in the Q&A box and we will get to them at the end. So without further ado, I will turn to my wonderful guest, Friederike, and ask her to give us a short introduction about herself before we kick off the discussion.
Thank you, and thank you, Asma, for the invitation that I'm being here. My name is Friederike. I'm the CEO of CONVINUS, and CONVINUS is a global mobility company advising companies in all the different legal matters about moving from one place to the other place. I just said this morning, we started with really assignments being the hot topic. Now it's more global employment. And therefore, when Asma asked me to co-host with her, I was happily to accept it, because global immigration is really something which is one of the hot topics on our daily basis.
Great. Thanks so much, Friederike. And looking forward to the discussion. So just to kick off, really, I guess common issues majority of companies are facing is business travel across Europe. I face these questions on a regular basis. I have them all the time. And I guess what would be interesting is really just from your perspective. I mean, you deal with a lot of cross-border work. You're based in a very unique place, because Switzerland is slightly different from the rest of Europe. But the 90-day rule creates a lot of havoc for a lot of travelers, for businesses, and maintaining that risk and compliance element. So what would you say are the trends that you're seeing in the last 12 months?
I mean, I would say not really a trend, but more a challenge, that actually really, when people crossing the border, the custom officials are looking more strictly on their passports and on the stamps as well. And there are just, it takes a lot of time that they can cross the border in the end, because the custom official is looking whether the 90 days are fulfilled or not. And therefore, what we usually advise people who are coming really quite frequently or going frequently in the Schengen area to maybe have as well a travel calendar extract with them to show the custom official that when they entered and not, because sometimes in the passports you see the stamp of the entry at one page, and maybe 2 or 3 pages later you see the exit stamp, and it's not usually on the same page, and then custom officials come to a wrong conclusion.
Okay.
And that I think is really a big issue.
Yes, I think I've seen that across the board as well, and it's difficult for them to evaluate, because I've had people that say, they've been on the cusp of the 90 days and then they're stopped from going into the next country. So do you have examples of consequences that if people are stopped and they have reached the sort of the 90-day period, what happens in those scenarios? So if people are stopped, multiple travel, if you think about it, especially with British nationals, as we know, with Brexit, people are traveling into numerous meetings, or they're working remotely in those regions. Do you have some examples of things where it's gone wrong and how it's been managed?
Usually they are really being sent on the next plane back.
Okay.
And that is not just a one-time thing we've seen. We've seen that now multiple times. And the thing is, you can't even discuss with the officials there because they need to kind of implement the Schengen rules. And there's just a little or a small way they can kind of adjust to it. Um, we had a few cases where in Switzerland at least, they let the people in,
Mhm.
but there was really very, very exceptional situations, and with a strict advice that they really need to go back the very next day.
Okay. So I guess the difficulty, I mean, again, I see this time and time again in questions that I'm asked, is how is it calculated, right? Because some people will travel, so they're on a flight, for example. You go to France and maybe you're traveling to Germany. Maybe, you spend most of your time in an airport, you're on a flight. So how are the days calculated? Are those travel days included in the calculation for the purposes of the 90 days?
If they are in the country, I mean, basically, if you land at 10 p.m. in the evening, then that day still counts as a day if that is spent in a Schengen country. Therefore, you need really very, very strictly look at the days you are traveling and entering a country or not. So, if you are a business traveler and maybe you're responsible for the European countries, then that is one of the huge things to really look at it very, very carefully.
Okay, that's great advice. So, from an employer perspective, let's say companies, if they're looking to minimize risk and manage their travels, because large companies particularly have such a high volume of travelers, and I often sort of compare business travelers now to remote workers. It's almost like the wording has changed because and you will remember this when immigration was, maybe 10 years ago, probably, that the influx of business visitors around the world, and for tax purposes, I guess, mainly, that you had to track them and so forth. But now it's almost like even for immigration purposes, you're having to track them as to where they are, how much time they're spending. What should companies do from a good practice, a good management perspective? Because there are so many tools out there, but is it as good as just managing it on an Excel sheet? Should the onus be on the employees? Should companies have it in their policies so that the onus is shifted from the employer? Because my concern would be around employer liability, that if employees are traveling, they haven't been given good advice or guidance internally, and then they're stopped, and then they've been deported or they've been banned. And I've seen, and we're going to talk about bans as well,
Mm,
they're banned from entering any Schengen region or European member state.
mm.
That has consequences. So how can companies manage this in the right way? Obviously, there's no right or wrong answer in terms of being perfect, but at least protect themselves.
The problem is, yes, there are lots of tools and lots of companies as well establishing new tools, because the business traveler part or population is something which has, I would say, the biggest compliance risk, not only from immigration, but also tax and social security wise. And therefore, the immigration is just now really one of the hotter
Yeah.
topics. Um, with the UK and the Brexit, basically, it is for British or people from the UK coming to Switzerland even a bigger issue, and there is a lot of commuting back and forth. Therefore, would we just advise really at the beginning of the year to look at your population, see how you can best kind of schedule the travels or kind of go around or see when somebody travels and where, to make sure everybody is as well aware about the 90 days. And it's really every month or every quarterly just to reinforce the situation and tell again and again that they need to consider the 90 days. Because today, if people just book their travels, it's not any longer that you have to, or most of the people don't have to ask their superior, can I go, can I travel? And therefore, because of the flexibility in the job market or in the employment you have, the issue is that you need to kind of inform or give the information to really each individual or all the individuals, not just the you as a company have to have the information.
Okay, very good. And I guess following on from that, in terms of, I've seen instances now, especially particularly with Brexit, and I guess it applies across the world because UK had free movement previously, but for third country nationals particularly, the challenges are around getting work permits for different countries. So when you've got businesses that are based globally, they may send people in for short term, right? So sometimes it's weeks as opposed to months or years. And it's quick, short projects that they will go in for and that they've been used to. So even when you look at events or exhibitions or conferences, people will put up infrastructures or, you know, all kinds of media equipment or technical stuff that they're trying to do. And generally, if you think about it, I mean, if you look at the US rules, you look at the UK rules, across the board, business visitor rules allow for a certain level of flexibility. But I have experienced in the recent months where we had a client who had a conference in Europe, and they had workers that were there for 2 weeks to set up their stand and exhibitions, very large, kind of Olympic style conferences. And the venue was raided by inspectors, and they were removed from site and told they had to get work permits. So my question is, when you've got multiple, I mean, you've got Olympics coming up, you've got big, large events, people are going into Europe to set up. If they have to apply for a work permit for every single European country just for a period of 2 weeks, it seems like a big challenge for them, not only from a time perspective, also from a duration and a cost perspective. Are there any solutions to this, or is that just the case?
I would like to give you a good answer with yes, there's one solution, there's one permit for all the EU member states at least, but there's none. And the issue on top of it is each country, and that is now national immigration law, each country has their own law and their own rules. And there might be that in one country, you definitely have to have a work permit, like, for example, in Switzerland. For that kind of work, you definitely have to have one. And there might be countries you don't need because they see that as maybe a part of just if you have a business visa or you're just coming here for installation and you go again then, and it is less than 10 days or 8 days or something, you don't need to do anything at all. So it really depends on each country, and you have then to request, and that I think is where the administration and the huge cost is also coming from, that you have to ask and clarify the situation for each country. And then, yes, we do have the posted worker notification, which is quite a simple process, but still you need to do that, and you need to do that before the individual is coming to the country. And in case you don't have a legal entity in that country, you, with the posted worker notification, you always have to have a representation or someone representing you as well in the country. And there you not just need for the period the individual is coming to the country, you need to have someone, but in most of the countries, it is basically for 3 or 4 years ongoing, or even 5 years sometimes. So, and there are then costs because you need to pay for a lawyer or a law firm or a tax firm or whoever will be then the one being your representative in that country. You have to pay for that. And if you then think about it's just for a 2 weeks period or maybe 1 week period, then the cost is quite intensive. Plus, I mean, in the end, the client will have to pay it because you have to charge it in the end to the client as well. So for me, that sometimes I think it doesn't really make any sense because those people are not taking away jobs for the on the job market. I mean, I understand the issue about protecting your own market, but they don't take it away.
Yeah.
And I mean, in Switzerland, I have to honestly say we are even a bit more stricter. And there we have the issue as well that it's not just the immigrant or the work permit which is required. It's on top of it, we are taking care that every person who is coming to Switzerland has to get the same kind of salary level somebody is earning in Switzerland. And You may know, are aware of that as well. So the Swiss job market, or the Swiss salary level is quite high. Therefore, if you then send a construction worker, for example, for 10 days here to Switzerland, and he might have just a salary for 2,000 Swiss francs, and in Switzerland, maybe that position would be about 6,000 or 7,000 Swiss francs, then that difference as a gap has to be paid to the employee. And the employee, you as an employee, or even if the employee says, oh, I don't want that money, I'm happy to go there, I'm happy for the experience or whatever, but that's not possible. As an employee, you have to pay. It doesn't matter whether the employee is happy to not getting the money or not.
Yeah. No, that's interesting, because I guess from my experience, what we've been seeing is, yes, the rules say one thing, and like you say, with the short-term travel, it's challenging for companies because there is a big expense that's attached to it. But what I'm seeing more is we're liaising more with authorities to try and get those exemptions, to explain what the, it's not even exemption, to be honest, it's a business case, right? So it's a representation of, it doesn't make logical sense for somebody to be getting work permits for the scenarios that they are. And what I'm seeing, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit later, but I mean, every time I speak to the immigration authorities, they resonate, they understand. And I think it's about getting them to agree, and then providing comfort letters and supporting letters to be able to manage it. And if something arises, is my advice to companies would be to actually seek advice early and to try and minimize that risk. Because one of the trends that I'm seeing quite often now, and which I'm going to ask you, Friederike, about, is really bans, because that seems to, I mean, the recent reports of increase in bans right across Europe, particularly when people are either found, and again, I'm going to talk a little bit more about inspections, etc. But I'm seeing more and more employees saying they're being banned because they're not compliant, or they're doing an activity that wasn't reported, or that the permit that they have doesn't quite meet the requirements. I mean, there was an example somebody gave me in Portugal as an example, that there was a inspection that took place for a company, and they had lots of project workers there. And what happened was, when the immigration authorities started to speak to these workers, they all spoke in Portuguese. And when they asked, what are you doing here? Why are you here? They said, we are coming from a sending company. They didn't explain their nationality. So while they were speaking Portuguese, they were all Brazilian. So they were found to be in breach of what the rules were. And so there were bans that were actually, issued across the board. So I just wanted to get your perspective on bans and how that works in the EU.
That is something which, I mean, I can particularly speak now about Switzerland, that is something which increases. And the thing is that one topic is the labor market inspection in the end, in the company or in the premises they are working. And the topic is that if the labor market inspector then asks the worker the question, what are you doing here? And he might then say, I'm working, I'm doing whatever. And the problem is that maybe beforehand, when he was talking to his HR and they asked him, what are you doing there? He said, I'm just being there for meetings. I'm not doing actually anything at all. And maybe then the advice was from the HR, okay, meeting, exchanging information. There's no need of a work permit. Therefore, we are safe. We don't need to do anything. And the problem is that the employees or the workers will, in the end, facing the labor market inspector themselves. And if sometimes I think that is also a human's thing, if an inspector is coming to you, you are already in a bit of a not relaxed atmosphere, and then you might just answer something which you shouldn't have answered. And the thing is, as soon as someone is then saying work, they will look in their computer or in the system and see and check whether there's a work permit in place or not. If not, there's immediately he has to leave the premises and it has to stop to work. And therefore, that is something which you cannot even do anything. We always tell our clients or companies that if they don't exactly know what the individual is doing, then rather go the more conservative way and ask for a permit beforehand, or make aware the employee as well. Because the thing is, if there's one employee who might be in a labor market inspection and something like that happened, and he has to leave, that might be fine, and the ban or the fine will be just for the employee. But if that happens multiple times, or if there are a couple of, then maybe the company is actually banned from providing services as well to the country. And in Switzerland, we have a list, which is a blacklist, where you can, even in the internet, you can find all the names of the companies who are banned, and then you can see for how many years they are banned in Switzerland to provide services. And it's not just with the labor market inspection in place, but it's also, we had a case where a company received letters, and it was a Belgian company. They received letters from the Swiss authorities because they wanted to know exactly what their people are doing in Switzerland. They received the letter in French. The person who received the letter didn't really understand that is an official letter. And honestly, it doesn't really look like a very official letter. Therefore, they didn't do anything. And they sent 2 reminders. They didn't reply to it because they didn't know what it is about. It wasn't in their language they speak, so they didn't care about it. In the end, the last reminder is then usually sent via the embassy or the consulate. And that one they have received, and then they came to us, but then it was quite too late. We were trying to negotiate with the company, with the authority here in Switzerland, but in the end, they were banned for 3 years. And they had huge machines being sold to Switzerland, and they were not able to do anything. There were no maintenance work they could have done with their own workers. So in the end, they had to set up a new company and then employ those employees with a new company to send them to Switzerland. And things like that, or situations like that, happens in the other EU member states just the same way.
Yeah, no, I've seen a lot actually recently, which is why this webinar came about, because there's so much activity going on. And I think there's been a perception of relaxation of rules in the EU, when you've seen lots around nomads, you've seen some countries introducing new categories with tech visas, etc., startup visas. And so there is a general perception of relaxation. That happened with the UK as well. And I think we're coming out of COVID, we've come out of COVID, and we've come on the other side. We've seen significant changes, but this, the current wars that we're dealing with, the economies that we're dealing with, has an impact. And the trend that I personally am seeing with the UK 2024 and beyond is about compliance. It's about inspections. It's about audits. We know certainly the UK is looking at that. And so in readiness for this webinar, I did actually take some due diligence of my own, and I went out and I spoke to the European Labour Authority. And I also spoke to immigration inspectors in France, and I thought I'd get a perspective from Germany as well. And it was really interesting findings, because around the posted workers, especially around third country nationals, were quite often that people use. What they said is they've actually created a report, and I think they're going to publish it soon, because this is kind of been happening in the last couple of months. So it's very kind of topical news right now, is that they're saying that people who are coming into Europe, especially remote workers, posted workers, business travelers, they kind of go under the radar, and authorities they don't have a mechanism to target them directly. There is no kind of a collaborative system. And so what these authorities are doing, on the one hand, they're giving a carrot to say, we're relaxing the rules, go and get work permits, come into Europe, come as a nomad, because again, there's a shortage of talent and there's a shortage of different types of experience. But what he said to me was that there's an increase of migration into Europe over the last couple of years. And despite this relaxation, what they're seeing is that they can't police a lot of or track a lot of the information. And so every time they go and do an inspection, they're finding it really difficult to collect information, or people haven't got the records and they don't know why people are there. So it's using up a lot of resources. So the future trend of what they're doing is creating collaboration amongst all member states. So immigration authorities will start to unify and share data and information with each other, because as we go to digitization and we go to digital entries and all these ETAs that are coming in, they're going to issue more fines on the spot, right? Because it's about how are these governments going to recoup the money that they've spent during COVID years and make revenue in their own countries. And so I think that from the conversations that I'm having is inspections are on the rise, and fines will be on the rise, and there's going to be a unified approach across countries. So if someone's working in, say, Germany, and then decides then they're going to spend some time in France or Portugal, those governments will be able to collaborate with each other and get the data from that to see what the person has been doing and what their travel history has been. So I don't know if you've seen that across Switzerland and if that's the trend that you're seeing, but this was the actual hot off the press in terms of direct from the immigration authorities, the information that I received from them last week.
Absolutely. That's exactly what we also see in Switzerland. And the thing is as well that in Switzerland, the number of inspectors have now each year for the last, I think, 3 years increased each year by the doubled kind of the number of inspectors. And it's, I would say 5 years ago, 6 years ago, it was more or less the inspections just at construction sites or the more kind of difficult areas. Now you can have them in any kind of bank, insurance company, industry company. There's no difference at all whether it's a huge company or a small one. They will go and come. And the thing is, they only speak then, and that is the difficulty in Switzerland as well. We do have our 3 languages. So if you're in the German speaking part, the labor market inspector will speak to you in German. They can speak even French, Italian, or English, but they won't do that with you. And the individual will be on his own or on her own. There's nobody allowed to be there, only a translator, but that is something you just have to then ask as well for that. And sometimes those people are then a bit reluctant in actually asking for it. So I think that will be for a more difficult situation. Plus, you're right, companies or thought that with the agreement of free movement, there's no problem at all any longer. You just can go to another country, work there. There's no problem at all, as long as you are living in one of the EU member states. But these business travelers or providing services is not one of the part of the agreement of free movement, and therefore that was always you had to have a work permit. And that realization that is something which actually there's a fine to it, there are consequences to it. I think companies starting to realize it and seeing that they really have to do something. Because if we talk to companies, sometimes we get the answer, but there's no problem. I mean, nobody's checking us. Why should we care about it? I mean, that might have happened with whoever company, but for us, that will never be an issue. And usually only in case there's then one incident, they start to rethink it. And then they start to really work on it.
I totally agree. And it's interesting you say that, because I've seen that happen in France, and I've also seen it happen in Sweden, where they basically they'll speak to you in the local language and they refuse to speak English even though they can. But what my advice to companies and to individuals is to make sure you get representation, even though they might say you can't, but you should get representation because you're entitled to it. So do not try and answer those questions on your own, because they can be quite daunting.
Absolutely. And also, it doesn't matter whether you have now maybe the CEO or a higher rank employee coming. It's the same way. Those people are not answering differently the questions than any other person. There's the same thing. If they get then the question, what are you doing here? There's very quickly they say, we are working. And that is then the bigger issue. But it's also with the Schengen regulation that still, I mean, if you have those work permits in place and if you have someone who has to maybe is responsible for different or a number of countries, um, you have still to work on those 90-day rule for example, for a British person, because the Schengen regulation has to be considered. And that is sometimes not very easy. So you have really to track and be quite accurate in your planning to make sure you're not overstepping those 90 days.
Of course, no, absolutely. So, Friederike, I just wanted to touch a little bit more on A1 certificates, because I think there is a perception, people think these are only, well, I mean, maybe some people will think they're only applicable to people who have work permits, but these are also applicable to business travelers. So perhaps you could just elaborate a little bit on A1 certificates, when they come in to play, when people need to be thinking about them, just to make sure that they're compliant.
In principle, it's really from the first day. So as soon as you travel, I mean, if you, for example, will come to Switzerland for a day meeting with us here, you would actually have to have an A1 in principle. The issue is that you might coming now for 20 times to Switzerland and nobody's really asking for you, asking for the A1, and therefore you think, okay, I don't need that. I won't do that anymore because it's still quite a bit of time or you need in order to get it. And then looking at the UK administration, we had a couple of cases where it took in the end 6 months to get the A1 certificate issued.
Wow.
Also, if you talk to the one or the other social security, some will tell you, oh, we can also do that retroactively, issue the A1 if you really need it. Because also they think that it's not really necessary. It means a lot of work for them. Now, Switzerland, as well as the EU member states, have established an IT platform, basically where you have to request that A1, and on that platform, the other country gets the information automatically that the individual is coming to the country.
Okay.
And will then also, in principle, also automatically approve. Now, not all countries are already on that platform, but the idea is in the end that each EU member state is on that platform, and that therefore A1s are getting issued quite quickly and straightforward. The thing is, in the end, you can be fined, as well as we had cases where people had to stop to work because they were not able to provide the A1. The A1 certificate itself, I mean, it doesn't actually say very much. It's just that the authorities think it is a kind of proof that someone is in one country, is paying their social security and is covered and insured.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just a document. I mean, we were talking a couple of times here in Switzerland to the authorities and saying, we can also show the payslip instead, where you also see that someone is paying Social Security, and that might even be a better proof. But for them, at some point, the A1 was one part of that whole um, business traveler issue or work permit thing, and therefore it's just one document you need to have. And there was a thing a year ago, an article here in France, actually, where on the French border, service people were entering with it by car France from, I think it was Luxembourg, and they were stopped. They were asked whether they have an A1, and they were saying, no, we don't. And then they were just sent back home. They were not allowed into the country. I mean, that has also, I think there was an incident, at least, which made to the newspaper in Germany, as well as one in Italy. But I think there are lots of more issues or things like that, situations like that, which arise. Therefore, my advice usually is try to, if you know you have an employee who's traveling quite frequently, see to get, instead of an A1 for just for that one trip, see to get an A1, like a multi-state worker A1, so you can get that for 12 months, covering maybe all the countries the individual might go to, and therefore you can reduce your administration a bit.
Okay, very good. So at this point, I just wanted to say, if anyone has any questions about anything we've discussed so far, please put them into the Q&A session on the right-hand side, and hopefully we'll get to them at the end and answer them for you as much as we can. But yeah, just to continue, because this is, as I said, it's a session packed with lots of questions from myself and information that we want to share with you as well. So I'll continue, and then we'll get to the questions after that. I also, Friederike, wanted to touch a little bit about Swiss immigration because it's so unique to everything else. And it's subject, I mean, you've got a different set of rules and requirements for every canton in Switzerland. And it's almost like you have to really understand all the nuances and all the complications around it. So if you could just share a little bit more about Switzerland in particular, because so many companies are headquartered there. And, you know, there is frequency of travel. I don't think in my career history I've ever known anyone not to go to Switzerland for either work or business or short-term stay. So please, if you could just give us share a little bit more about the complexities of Switzerland.
I mean, if we talk about the business traveler population, then basically I would say you would need for most of them already from more or less day one a work permit. We have a couple of exceptional rules. One exception, which is for 8 days, somebody can come to Switzerland without the need of a work permit. However, we make it quite complicated because we also differentiate then for where someone is employed. So, for example, the American employed in America coming to Switzerland, he can work in Switzerland for up to 8 days without the need of the work permit. The German national being employed in Germany, he can't come for 8 days because we have for EU nationals or for employees from a company situated in an EU member state, we have different rules. The 8 days are not any longer just viewed by the employee, but also for the company side. And that makes it already quite complicated in order to get the right advice to the companies and that they are aware of the right rules and what they have to do. In principle, you said it, we have 26 cantons. Each canton works on the procedure and processes a bit differently. Also, what I said earlier about the salary level, that is also different. So you have to look at the canton someone is going to and then check on the Swiss equivalent salary required for that canton. Also, the documents and everything has to be, depending on the canton you go to, in different languages. What we usually do and advise companies, if you know somebody has to come quite often to Switzerland, then we say the 120 days work permit is maybe the best choice, because then someone can come to Switzerland for and work here for up to 120 days in a 12-month period. So you don't really need then to check on whether he's coming now tomorrow or next week. So he can frequently, or the business traveler can frequently use it. He can use it whenever he needs to go. He just has to make sure on those 120 days. There's another options like the posted worker notification. We have a notification process as well in place, but there you need to exactly indicate the day you're coming to Switzerland. And if you say you're coming on the 4th of May, for example, and then a day before that you decide, oh no, I'm not coming on the 4th of May, I actually come already today, the 3rd of May. So that would not be possible with the notification process. Therefore, even it was implemented as to ease and the whole administration process. It is quickly done. Everybody can do that online, but the thing is that the flexibility is less in the end, and therefore, if you think about bigger companies, that they have to really take care of those notifications, have always then to go back to their employees and say, when are you traveling? Please tell us, because we have to do the notification. We need the exact day. And our today's world, things change in your schedule from today to tomorrow. So you might change your flights, but you forget to tell the HR or the person dealing with the notification, and then you're already in an issue with it. Therefore, that's quite complicated. Also, maybe the 120 days permit, even that allows you to be here or to work in Switzerland for up to 120 days in a 12 months period. If you're a non-EU national, you still have to look at the Schengen rules. Therefore, you also have to consider that you can't stay more than those 90 days in a 180 days period. So you have, in the end, both rules to apply to the situation, which makes it not that easy, I would say.
Yeah, it's quite overwhelming actually, because I mean, the confusion around the 8 days that you mentioned. So, for example, a third country national could come in for business for 8 days, but a German national can't. Can you just give us a little bit more clarification around that? Because I think people in the audience may want to know, because again, a German national to me is an EU national. So, what's the difference?
The difference is really you have to look at where the individuals are employed.
Okay.
So if you have a company in the EU, in one of the EU member states, then also the American employed in a German company can't you have to look at the company as well on the 8 days, because the company, or the employer, better to say, has the right to send for 8 days people to Switzerland to work. So it's not any longer viewed just as on the employee side, on the employer side as well.
Right.
Whereas the easier road, or the easier way, is if you have someone employed outside of the EU region, then you can look at each individual specifically and say everybody can come here to Switzerland to work for 8 days, which makes it much more sense, is more simple, and it's better to actually navigate through.
Okay, great. Thank you. Right. So I guess the next question I have is one which is going to be an interesting one, is about the single permit that covers the whole of Europe. And that has come up because, again, there's a lot of unification going on. And when I'm speaking to the European Labour Authority last week as well, you know, this is something that is recognized at the moment. And it takes me back to the past again, when, I mean, UK was part of the EU. We had, we were able to, you know, kind of take benefit or take advantage of European rules as well. But however, the UK immigration authorities for a really long time did not recognize directives or whatever the European Commission would rule. And it took high court cases and litigation for, you know, for cases to be rejected, and for us to go all the way to the European High Court or European Court of Justice to be able to get a precedent for the UK immigration authorities and to recognise European law. However, across the member states, you know, there is a very different way in how every country operates and how they want to define work permit processes and immigration laws separately. But the European Commission has put a directive together that you can have a single permit that covers you for all countries. So it's quite open and possible to make the application. So I wanted to ask you, really, I mean, have you seen this in operation so far? I mean, I've seen 2 applications so far. One which one we're doing where it's challenged and the immigration authorities just refuse to recognize it. The second one, we're kind of through the phase that we're going through, but actually they're challenging the labour market. So there's some challenges around there. But I guess what I wanted to know is, from your perspective, because obviously you work in Europe quite a lot, is have you seen anything like this? What is your perspective on this? What's your view?
No, I actually haven't seen it so far, and we also never dealt with it so far. I mean, I think it would be great, and it would be also good to strengthen the EU itself as an institution, as something where they can actually promote much better their combined market. Um, but I see that countries might not just jump on that and say, oh, great, that is a great solution for us, because each country wants to have their own way of dealing with it. And if you look at that posted worker notification, how long as it took to each country in the end having that system in place. And if you look now, not even everything is in English available. In some of the countries you still have it in their own native language, and maybe a language like, I think Sweden is still in Swedish. And there was 2 or 3 other countries where I saw where it's not a language where you actually have lots of people speaking it. Maybe not like English or French, which is a bit more common than other languages. And therefore, I see, or I'm not that convinced that that will really be flying out that well, but we will see.
Okay, great. I mean, it's nice to get your perspective on it, I guess, because we've got the experience of the 2 cases that are ongoing at the moment.
Mm.
And again, I think in summary, what I want to say is there are, every country has their own process for getting work permits. And I think we've seen that across the board. And everybody wants to have control to work in their own domain because it's easier to understand the rules and processes. And then it's also easier to do enforcement and undertake, whatever activities that they need to. But European Commission has overriding directives, right? That there's a purpose behind it. Those directives that sit above some of these singular processes have a meaning, and they're meant to harmonize the rules across all member states and to make it easier. Now, with Brexit and with what's going on in the economy and all the changes that are happening, globalization, companies wanting to put their talent anywhere and everywhere, the flexibility of forward thinking rather than backward thinking. I guess what is important to understand is the direction is to harmonize the rules for all member states. But in reality, the reason why there's a resistance is not because it doesn't exist or we can't apply for it. It's because these countries don't understand the directives. So it's hard work to find the skilled immigration officers, I would say, who are equipped to look at what Germany says or what Switzerland is saying or what France is saying, because there are too many complexities around it. So they would have to put more time and effort into understanding and adhering to how do they unify. Because if I have somebody that is living in one country and wants to apply for a single permit that allows them to all member states, I then have to collaborate with all those member states to understand what it is that I need to do. And I think that's the challenge. The reason why they say no or they make it hard is because they don't know what to do. So that doesn't mean that the rule doesn't exist or it can't be challenged.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Plus, they all want to protect their own market.
Yes.
And as well as if you look at the political side and if you see who are the presidents from which parties and what kind of way that is going in each of the countries, everywhere they are more protective about and their own market as well as economy wise. So I think there will be still a couple of challenges for that.
No, absolutely. But anyway, going by my sheer nature, I love challenging and pushing the boundaries and going to places where no one has been before, right? So the idea is you've got to get results, because what's the point? Otherwise, immigration becomes too boring. And that's my philosophy. I feel like if you're not pushing or you're not trying, and that's what I love about the immigration rules, because immigration rules are there. Governments introduce them to provide a framework that you should follow. And in a business context, if they don't make sense or they don't fit the framework of what you're doing or what you're trying to achieve, or they have an impact on the way you do business, then I have a general belief that you should question them and whether they're fit for purpose and whether it's worth your investment in time or cost to change that status quo. And in my view, the riskiest thing anyone can do is maintain the status quo in anything. So I'm going to end our session today by saying a quote: challenging the status quo takes commitment, courage, imagination, and above all, dedication to getting the results you want. So always challenge it and don't. So if the rules exist, challenge them. So on that note, Friederike, I think we've probably covered our time for this session today. It's been great listening to your kind of input and your expertise on Europe and everything else that you have shared with us today. We've got quite a few questions in on the side. So I think what we'll do is we'll go through these one by one and hopefully answer them for our listeners. So the question, I'm going to start from the bottom upwards. It's somebody is asking, what is the name of the online platform that you can apply for the A1 certificates? Can you please post the link? So we will share that with you. I don't know how to share it in this chat, but we will share that link with you afterwards. and send that to you, Simona. The next question is A1 certificate needed as well as a work permit and for business travel meetings, etc.? I will pass that to you, Friederike.
Yes, it is needed, unfortunately, and you need, I mean, the A1 certificate you need in any case for any kind of travel you have, also for just meetings. The thing is whether you need a work permit depends a bit on what the individual is doing and what the law, the labor, the immigration law says in the country the employee has to go.
Okay, great, thank you. I hope that's answered the question. If you would like more clarification, please do feel free to ask us. The next question is, are the 90 days counted manually by an immigration officer at a border airport, or is there some inter-Schengen online system that tracks the days?
Actually, they have both. Sometimes they just really look at the passports and as said as at the entry stamps and the exit stamps. And we had a couple of people who in the end really, because the official was calculating it wrongly and then said they are not allowed in. And in the end, when they really took the time to go through each of the pages and seeing where the entry stamp and the exit stamp actually correspond, they saw that the individual had not been more than 90 days. So you will see both. And therefore, our advice is for people who really have to go frequently to the Schengen area, see whether they are not taking an extract from a travel calendar, a copy of it with them, so they can show in case they're questioned, because otherwise it just takes quite a long time and it's not a nice atmosphere standing then in front of the custom official there.
Great, thank you. And the next question is, what strategies can companies use in case of an inspection? Are there proactive measures companies can take to avoid or mitigate the likelihood of receiving an inspection?
The thing is, you not can't avoid them. They will just happen. The only thing what you can do is really make sure that you are quite well prepared and really then work together with the inspector. And what we have seen is, as long as you're working well with the inspector, being nicely, answering nicely to them, giving them whatever they need, but also kind of second guess it and get maybe someone helping you, supporting you, who really has an idea about why that inspection is, because sometimes you also provide then maybe too much information, which actually will go in the wrong way. So I think support at that time, at least, you should really ask for a lawyer who has an idea of immigration law in that specific country to help you through.
Great. And also record keeping and making sure that, you know, you are keeping all of
Yeah.
your files up to date so that if anything comes up and if any information is produced, at least you're covered. So the last question we have is, how about a person from an EU country employed by a UK company? How would they be treated if they would come to any EU country to work remotely?
I mean, that depends now whether there is a possibility for this or not in the EU member state. I mean, there are some which allow that, which where they have the kind of digital nomad visa or allow people or UK people to work here remotely. In Switzerland, for example, if you're an non-EU national, there would be no solution or no possibility to work for that employee, because you would need a work permit, and usually if you need a work permit you need a sponsor here, and the sponsor meaning a legal entity which employs you or a client for whom you are working. Therefore you need to check really in the specific country you're looking at whether there is a possibility of that or not.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Friederike. That's great. So I hope we've answered all the questions for everyone. Again, as always, if you have questions that you would like to ask us afterwards, please send us through. We will pass those to Friederike as well. Hopefully she can help answer those too. But I hope the session was useful to you all and that you enjoyed it. And please feel free to feedback in any way you can. Otherwise, yeah, we've come to the end of the session. We're continuing our series of immigration webinars. We are going to delve into the directives, European directives at some point as well. But the next one is going to be around Italy because it's so complicated. And there are lots of changes happening in Italy. So we will send out details around that. So look forward to seeing you all again. And thank you and have a great week.
Thank you, Asma.
Thank you.